I inherited the farm from my father, and he had inherited it from his uncle, my great-uncle Hollis, whose name I barely knew growing up. The property sat on a wide stretch of flat land with a battered old barn and a crooked well near its far edge. When I was a child, I used to throw pebbles down that well to hear them clatter against the stones before they plopped into the water below. The echo that came back always gave me chills. Even on sunlit summer days, something about that well felt wrong. Back then, the well was sealed with a rusted metal lid that could be slid aside for maintenance, but my father kept a padlock on it. "Bad water," he'd say if I asked. "It's not safe, so stay away." Of course, that only fed my curiosity, but I never dared disobey. Once I grew older, I stopped thinking about it. Life moved on, and I rarely visited the farm unless it was a major holiday or a family gathering. When my father passed away, I found myself the reluctant owner of these fields and the buildings upon them. I drove out to the farm one chilly autumn afternoon to take stock of what I had. The land was unkempt, tall grass and weeds swayed in the wind, and the front porch sagged under years of neglect. I spent the first day cleaning out dust and rummaging through my father's old office. That's when I discovered Hollis's journal. It wasn't even hidden, just tucked behind a stack of ancient account books in a wooden crate by the desk. The journal was bound in cracked brown leather, the pages yellowed and brittle. I assumed it was some sort of farm ledger, maybe notes on livestock or harvest cycles. But as soon as I opened it, I saw a different story entirely. A story that would unravel the quiet dread I'd always felt about the well. The first entries seemed mundane enough. Lists of tasks, weather observations, brief mentions of fences that needed mending or crops that had failed. It was dated to the early 1950s, around the time my great-uncle Hollis was in his 30s. After flipping a few pages, I found mentions of the well in passing. Initially, it seemed he was concerned about contamination or dryness, but as I skimmed further, the tone shifted. March 3rd, 1952, saw something moving by the well this evening. Looked like a snake or eel, but bigger. Could it be some critter that crawled in? Must keep an eye on it. At first I scoffed. A snake? An eel? Maybe it was just a large rat. But the entries became increasingly strange, written in a rushed, cramped script. March 15th, 1952. Heard a growling noise echo up from the well last night. Could have been the wind. Or maybe I'm just imagining. But it sounded wet, like an animal choking on water. My skin prickled. I was suddenly reminded of the dark shape that hovered at the back of my childhood memories. That sense of something off about the well. I turned a few more pages. March 29th, 1952. Maggie, the old barn cat, went missing. Found blood on the stones near the well, no body. I can't prove it's connected, but I feel it. Whatever's in that well is hungry. My heart thudded. This was starting to sound less like normal farm problems, and more like something out of a nightmare. Hollis's writing seemed more frenzied as the pages went on, skipping days in between entries, sometimes leaving cryptic half-sentences. April 10th, 1952. It came halfway out tonight. Almost as tall as a man now. Arms. Or tentacles. God help me, I don't know how to describe it. We tried to kill it. Shot at it. It shrieked. April 11th, 1952. Blood in the grass, black and thick. The smell was awful, burned my nostrils. We thought we killed it. Dear Lord, I hope we did. My stomach lurched. I remembered hearing old rumors that great-uncle Hollis was not quite right before he died, that he was prone to odd outbursts and nights of heavy drinking. But no one ever mentioned this. The final entry took up less than a quarter of the page, scrawled as if in haste or terror. April 12th, 1952. We thought we killed it, but it left something down there. An egg or spawn. It's still growing, I can feel it. The water is wrong. I hear it at night. I smell it. God, it's still alive. And that was it. No more entries. No conclusion. Nothing about how they might have disposed of the thing. Just the horrifying knowledge that something lay in the well, waiting, growing, hidden in the murky darkness. I closed the journal and leaned back in my father's old desk chair, the leather squeaking beneath me. My mind buzzed with questions. Was this all just a product of a man's failing sanity? Had Hollis been hallucinating? Or was there some genuine threat lurking in the well? Curiosity gnawed at me. The sun was already dipping below the horizon, painting the sky a dusky purple. Even though my father had rarely mentioned the well, I remembered the heavy padlock, the sealed cover. He must have known something, or at least believed the water was bad enough to keep it locked. But had he ever truly suspected the same horrors Hollis described? I put the journal away, telling myself I'd check the well tomorrow in the daylight. There were so many tasks to do, though. The barn needed inspection, the fence posts were rotting in places, and the fields needed mowing. The well was hardly my top priority, and yet I couldn't stop thinking about that final line. It's still growing. That evening, after heating a can of soup in the farmhouse kitchen, I tried to relax. The interior was musty but at least warm. With electricity still connected, I had the lights on and found a working radio. The old place felt lonely, but I was used to solitude. As I flipped through static-laced stations, I caught an old blues tune. It soothed me for a while until the wind picked up outside. Branches scraped the windows, making me jump. I decided I'd sleep in my father's old room, which was on the ground floor. The bed was stiff, but the linens were fresh enough, and I was tired from the day's labor. I set the journal on the nightstand, next to a flickering lamp. The wind whistled around the farmhouse's corners, and the boards creaked softly, settling in the drop of temperature. I nearly drifted off when I heard a noise that made my hair stand on end. It sounded like a low moan, distant, but carried on the wind. A guttural, throaty rumble that seemed to vibrate the window panes. I sat up, heart pounding, straining my ears. The radio was off. There was no hum of electronics. Outside, the wind died for a moment, as if holding its breath. Nothing. Just the rustle of leaves and the squeak of an old shutter. I told myself it was just my imagination, spurred by Hollis's journal. But that uneasy feeling gripped me all the same. I tried to sleep again, and after an hour or so of tossing and turning, I finally managed to drift off. Morning light filtered through the threadbare curtains, waking me earlier than I would have liked. My back was stiff from the old mattress. I rubbed sleep from my eyes and stumbled to the kitchen for coffee. The memory of last night's moan lingered. I told myself that if I was going to stay here long term, I needed answers about that well. After breakfast, I pulled on my boots and jacket. The day was crisp, the sky a deep blue. A gentle breeze ruffled the tall grass. I walked across the yard to the barn first. A rotted wooden door hung off its hinges. Inside, dust motes floated in the sunlight. Old tools and rusted farm equipment were strewn about. A few mouse droppings scattered the floor. No sign of anything unusual. I circled behind the barn, my gaze flicking to that well. The structure was made of old stones, slightly crumbling, with a metal lid set on top. As a child, I remembered seeing a chain around it, though it must have broken off or rusted away. Now the lid sat askew, no padlock in sight. Was it possible my father had removed it at some point? The air smelled damp, even though it hadn't rained for a week. Small vines crept up the stones, and I noticed the rock surface was slick to the touch, coated in a faint green algae. With a grimace, I grasped the edge of the metal lid and tried to slide it aside. It was heavier than I remembered, but after a moment of straining, I managed to open it enough to peer inside. Darkness. A few feet down, I saw the circumference of the well, the stones cold and wet. Further below, all I could see was black water, reflecting a speck of daylight from above. An unpleasant, musty odor wafted up earthy and sour, like decaying leaves or stagnant pond water. Not unusual for a disused well, I told myself. But then I heard a faint drip, drip, drip echoing from deeper within. And just for a second, perhaps a trick of the imagination, I thought I heard a slithering sound. I shuddered. My rational brain insisted it was probably just my mind playing games. Animals or amphibians might live in there, frogs or snakes. But the memory of the journal's final lines clawed at my thoughts. It's still growing. I slid the lid back into place, letting it clang shut. Perhaps I should call someone, an inspector maybe. But who do you call for a well that might harbour a monstrous creature? The local plumber. I decided to keep an eye on it for now. Maybe later I'd see if I could drain the well or fill it in. My father had apparently left it sealed for a reason. I spent the rest of the day clearing brush around the barn, trying to keep busy. Now and then I caught myself glancing at the well. Each time I felt a wave of unease. That evening I tried to shake off the anxiety. I made a more substantial dinner, had a beer, and read an old newspaper I found in the living room. Outside, the sun sank into a crimson horizon. Insects chirped in the grass, and a breeze rustled the eaves. By the time I went to bed, I had almost convinced myself that Hollis's story was nonsense, that the moan I heard last night was just wind. I awoke to a rasping sound, like something heavy dragging over wood. It was pitch black. My bedside clock read 2:17 a.m. I lay still, my heart hammering. The noise came again, a slow slide, then a thump. It sounded as if it was coming from outside, near the barn, or near the well. Grabbing a flashlight, I crept to the window. The farmhouse's yard was bathed in moonlight, revealing tall grass rippling in the breeze. The barn loomed as a dark shape in the distance. I saw nothing moving. No figures, no animals, no silhouette. Yet the sound persisted. A wet, scraping noise, faint but distinct. I hesitated. Every instinct told me to stay inside, but I felt compelled to investigate. Perhaps it was an injured animal. If it was a coyote or some stray dog, leaving it might be cruel or dangerous. I pulled on boots, a coat, and quietly let myself out the back door. The night air bit at my skin, cooler than expected. The flashlight's beam cut across the yard. I stepped carefully, mindful of the uneven ground. My pulse pounded in my ears. No sign of anything. The scraping had stopped. Now all I heard was a gentle wind hissing through the grass. Then, from the direction of the well, I heard a noise that chilled me. A low, guttural growl. It was short, almost like a cough, but it rumbled with an unnatural resonance. I froze. The flashlight trembled in my hand. "Hello?" I called, instantly regretting it. The only answer was another soft growl. Slowly I inched toward the well. My feet seemed to move on their own, curiosity mixing with dread. The sound of trickling water reached my ears. An odor of damp and rot filled my nose, reminding me of the day's earlier whiff, only stronger. When I neared the well, the flashlight revealed the metal lid shifted off to one side, leaving a gap wide enough for something to emerge. My blood turned to ice. I'm sure I put it back, I thought. So how had it moved? And by what? With a shaking hand, I pointed the flashlight beam into the gap. Water glistened below, swirling slightly. For a split second, I thought I saw movement, as if a large shape sank just beneath the surface. That's when the wet, slithering noise began, echoing from the depths. It sounded like thick, oozing slime dragging against stone. My stomach lurched. The beam of light quivered. Then I heard the growl again, louder and more agitated. I scrambled back, nearly falling over my own feet. In my panic, I knocked the lid. It scraped the rim of the well with a metallic screech, sending echoes bouncing. The growl turned into a snarl. Without thinking, I grabbed the edge of the lid and heaved, slamming it back into place. I stumbled away and sprinted to the farmhouse, heart thunderous in my chest. Once inside, I locked the back door, and for good measure I slid a heavy cabinet in front of it. I flicked on every light I could, as if brightness might keep the horrors away. For hours I sat in the kitchen, clutching a kitchen knife and listening for any sign that something had followed me. But there was only silence, broken by my trembling breaths. Dawn eventually crept in. I realized, groggily, that the wet slithering had not resumed. Perhaps the creature, whatever it was, had retreated, or maybe it was just biding its time. I dozed fitfully, leaning against the wall, the knife still in my hand. That morning, I felt numb, both from lack of sleep and from the shock of what I'd witnessed. The memory of that guttural growl reverberated in my mind. Hollis's journal flashed before me. We tried to kill it, shot at it. It shrieked. So it really was there, or at least something was, surviving all these decades, hidden in the well's dark water. Did my father know? Did he keep silent, hoping the padlock and sealed lid would be enough to contain it? The questions mounted. I needed more information. I searched the house again for any diaries, letters, or references to the thing in the well. Hours later, all I found was some old newspaper clippings in a trunk, mostly about local farm reports, a few obituaries, and references to a livestock plague from the 1940s. Nothing about a monstrous creature. A thought crossed my mind. Maybe the local historical society or the oldest neighbors might have heard a rumor. But then again, how would they react if I started asking about tentacled creatures or half-formed beasts slithering in wells? They'd think I was insane. The day passed in a haze. I tried to muster the courage to go back to the well, perhaps to set a heavier lid or seal it with concrete. But every time I considered it, an image of that black water and the thing lurking below surfaced in my thoughts. I found myself paralyzed by fear. Instead, I wandered the property's perimeter, checking for any sign of an exit path that the creature might have taken. The ground was soft in places, but I didn't see footprints or slime trails. That was almost worse. If it could leave the well without leaving tracks, how would I even know if it was creeping around at night? By the time the sun was setting, my nerves were on edge. I decided to call a friend, someone who lived about an hour away, to come visit, but they didn't answer. I left a shaky voicemail, not sure how much detail to provide. Then I locked every window and door in the farmhouse, shut the curtains, and waited. The third night was the worst. I was certain the creature would come. I didn't know how or when, but I felt it in my bones. I placed the journal on the kitchen table, as if having it nearby might answer my terrified questions. The words from Hollis's final entry ran circles in my head. We thought we killed it, but it left something down there. It's still growing. Around midnight, an uncanny silence fell outside. The insects stopped chirping. The breeze died. Even the farmhouse's usual creaks seemed to hold their breath. I sat in an armchair by the living room window, a loaded rifle in my lap, one of the few firearms my father had kept locked in a cabinet. My heart thumped in time with the ticking clock on the mantel. Minutes dragged into hours. My eyelids grew heavy. Then a scraping sound jolted me awake. My head snapped up. The clock read 2:44 a.m. I realized I must have dozed off, the rifle slipping from my grip. Focus, I told myself, grabbing it tight. Another scrape, followed by a soft thump. It came from outside, near the side of the house. Steadying my breath, I reached for the flashlight. Before I could turn it on, I saw a shape move past the window, blocking out a sliver of moonlight. My blood ran cold. It was tall, or at least as tall as a person. But it dragged itself along, the silhouette distorted, as if its body was partially hunched or slouched. I glimpsed something like an elongated arm or appendage brushing the side of the house. The wet scraping noise returned. It was real and very close, very. Then it paused near the window, perhaps sensing the light inside. I held my breath, rifle at the ready. My mind screamed for me to run or hide, but I remained rooted to the spot, muscles tense with terror. In the faint glow from a lamp, I saw the shape press against the window pane, a slick, glistening surface smeared across the glass. Slowly, an eye, if it was an eye, peered in. The shape was bulbous, watery, ringed with folds of dark flesh. Its color was impossible to discern in the dim light. And then I heard the strangled, bubbling growl like a drowning creature gasping for air. I lost it. Pulling the trigger blindly, I fired a shot. The flash lit the living room in a brief strobe of orange. The recoil nearly knocked me back. A high-pitched shriek tore through the night. The silhouette jerked away from the window. Glass cracked, but it didn't shatter. For a moment, the only sound was my ragged breathing, and the house smelled of gunpowder. Outside, I heard thrashing in the yard, the creature moaning in guttural agony. Then, in a few seconds, all fell silent once more. I flicked the flashlight on and aimed it through the window, expecting to see gore or a broken body. But there was nothing, just a smear of slimy fluid across the glass and tall grass swaying in the moonlight. No blood, no corpse. I locked myself in the bedroom after that, shaking uncontrollably. I wasn't sure if I'd wounded it or simply startled it. Either way, I'd proven I was armed and ready to fight. I hoped that might scare it off. Yet, as I tried to calm myself, I remembered Hollis's words. He and others had shot at the thing before. It shrieked, he wrote, but it lived, and it left something down there, still growing. When the pale dawn arrived, I was more exhausted than ever. The living room window had a spiderweb of cracks and a smear of blackish-green slime across it. I mustered the courage to inspect outside. There, in the dirt, I found a faint trail of slime leading away from the house back toward the barn, and inevitably, the well. That confirmed it. The creature was retreating to its lair. Every shred of common sense told me to flee, to abandon the farm and never return. But some fierce, stubborn resolve took hold of me. This was my land now, and if something so monstrous lurked beneath the surface, I couldn't just leave it for someone else to stumble upon. Maybe I was foolish, but I had to finish what Hollis started. So I formed a plan. I'd destroy the well. In broad daylight, I'd get cinder blocks, heavy stones, anything I could to fill it. Maybe I'd pour gasoline and set a fire if I had to, though I wasn't sure that would be effective against something aquatic. Alternatively, I could try to pump the well dry, but that might be an even bigger risk if it exposed the creature. I'd have to face it up close. No, burying it might be the only option. Suffocate or crush it. I'd also call the local municipality to see if I could hire someone with heavy machinery. That alone would be a challenge. I'd need a plausible reason. The well is structurally unstable, I might say. They'd want to inspect it, but I had no intention of letting them linger near that thing. If the creature emerged during the day, I shuddered. I spent the morning searching for materials. There were some cinder blocks behind the barn, left over from a collapsed silo. Rusted metal rods and piles of old fencing wire were stacked inside the barn. I found half a bag of quickset concrete mix in a corner, though it was likely hardened by age. Regardless, I took it all out, piling it near the well. Each time I approached, I felt my stomach twist. The air around the well seemed stale, as if the breeze dared not blow across it. By midday, the sun was high and hot. Sweat beaded on my brow as I began prying the lid open. If I was going to stuff the well with debris, I needed the lid removed. My heart thundered in my ears. I half expected the creature to lunge up at me, but as the metal scraped aside, revealing the dark hole, no monstrous shape appeared, just the murky water below. The smell was worse than before. A rancid stink of stagnant water and rotting flesh wafted up. God, I muttered, choking back bile. Then I hefted the first cinder block to the edge and dropped it in. There was a splash, followed by a dull thunk against the sides. If the creature was in there, maybe that would disturb it. I waited, rifle leaning against the well, ready to grab in a heartbeat. But minutes passed. No stirring from the depths. Maybe it's deep underwater, or maybe it can sense the daylight. Emboldened, I dropped 2 more blocks, one after the other. They splashed and sank. The water lapped at the sides, leaving slimy residue behind. Next came more blocks, jagged stones, random debris from the barn. Each time I paused, scanning the black surface for movement. Nothing. My nerves were taut, but I pressed on, determined. If I could fill the well, or at least clog it, maybe the creature would be trapped forever, or forced to flee while I stood guard. A full hour later, I had dropped nearly 24 chunks of concrete, brick, and rock. The water level rose slightly, displacing the volume. The stench intensified. Thick lumps of algae or some unidentified muck floated to the top. I stared into that swirling mess, half expecting a tentacle or an arm to break the surface. I decided I couldn't do much more on my own without heavy equipment. If the well was deep, I'd need tons of material to fill it properly. But at least I had done something. Sighing, I wiped sweat off my brow. My arm muscles ached from hauling. At the very least, I hoped the creature had sustained injuries and couldn't easily climb out. I spent the rest of the day anxiously patrolling the area, rifle in hand. I saw no sign of the creature. The sun eventually began to sink, painting the sky in orange and pink. That old sense of dread tightened around me again. Would it come tonight? If it did, I was prepared to shoot until I had no bullets left. But that evening brought only silence. I peered through the windows, scanning the yard, but saw nothing. By midnight, exhaustion claimed me. I set the rifle beside the bed and finally collapsed onto the mattress. At dawn, I woke with a stiff back, but a faint hope that maybe the worst was over. That's when I noticed a rancid odor drifting through the open window. Heart pounding, I got up and looked outside. A dark trail stretched from the barn toward the well, and the grass in that trail was flattened, coated in a thick, dark slime that shimmered in the morning light. My stomach lurched. It came out again? I followed the trail with my eyes. It led to the well, then disappeared over the rim. The metal lid was partly slid off, the same as before. A cold wave of realization hit me. The creature was still alive, and it was either removing or pushing aside the debris I'd thrown in. Swallowing my fear, I approached the well in broad daylight once again. The stench was overpowering. I covered my mouth and nose with a rag. The slime trail coated the stones around the rim, as though something massive had dragged itself over the edge. I forced myself to peer inside. The cinder blocks and rocks I'd dropped the day before were still there, but scattered in the water. Some had tumbled to the bottom, and a few seemed to be broken. Broken cinder blocks? That would require incredible force. Worse, I saw large scratch marks along the interior stone, as if clawed limbs or appendages had scraped the sides. The watery surface rippled gently, and I thought I glimpsed a sinuous shape below. Suddenly a bubble rose, popping with a faint glop, and I recoiled. That's when I saw something else, drifting near the top of the water, an animal carcass. At first I couldn't tell what it was, but then I realized it was a deer's hind leg, partially dissolved or eaten. My stomach turned. This creature was hunting, feeding, and disposing of remains in the well. Terror overwhelmed me. I bolted back to the house, slammed the door, and locked it. My plan to fill the well had clearly failed. The creature was too powerful. It seemed able to push aside or break the debris. Worse, it had grown bold enough to leave a trail for me to find, as though it didn't care if I saw it. That day, I made a new plan. I must destroy the well entirely. If I had to blow it up with dynamite, so be it. The idea sounded ridiculous, but in rural areas, old farmhands sometimes kept explosives for clearing stumps. I scoured the barn and shed for anything. No such luck, only a few old cans of gasoline and fertilizer. Not enough to make an effective bomb. Desperate, I called a local demolition service, but I had to leave a message. They weren't likely to come out same day. My next call was to the local equipment rental place, inquiring about renting a backhoe. The cost was astronomical, and they insisted on seeing the site first. By the time I hung up, I was shaking with frustration and fear. Tonight it might strike again. As dusk fell, I kept the rifle within arm's reach. I barricaded the doors, drew all the curtains, and set makeshift traps, loud clattering metal objects near windows, hoping that if the creature tried to break in, I'd at least be alerted. My plan was simple. If it came, I would shoot until it stopped moving, or I ran out of ammo. No more half measures. The hours dragged. My heartbeat seemed to echo in the silent house. I forced myself to stay awake, sipping black coffee, listening to the smallest creaks. Midnight arrived with a hush so profound it hurt my ears. The air felt charged, as if a storm was coming, though the sky was clear. Then around 1 a.m. the noises began. A wet, dragging sound, a muffled growl. My pulse raced. I flicked off the living room lamp, hoping to see outside more clearly. Through the curtains, I spotted a dark shape slithering across the yard. Even in the moonlight, it was hard to make out details, but it was large, maybe 8 or 9 feet in length if I counted the sinuous extension behind it. The front portion rose slightly, reminiscent of a head or torso, with limbs that pulled it forward. I swallowed hard. This was definitely bigger than the silhouette I saw the other night. It's still growing. The phrase hammered in my mind. My hands shook around the rifle. I took a deep breath and steadied myself. The creature moved closer, passing by the barn. It paused briefly, seeming to sniff the air or sense vibrations. Then it advanced toward the farmhouse. My mouth went dry. I crouched behind the window, rifle barrel resting on the sill. The slightest rattle of the glass might give me away, but I needed a vantage. Another few feet, and it would be in my direct line of sight. My heartbeat pounded like a drum. It slithered into the range of the moonlight. I saw glistening, leathery skin, blotched with lumps and ridges. An appendage that resembled an arm or a clawed limb dragged across the grass, leaving a trail of slime. Then it turned its head. If you could call that featureless mass a head revealing a single watery orb that glowed with a milky sheen. That was the moment I pulled the trigger, aiming for what I hoped was the center of its torso. The rifle barked and the creature shrieked, a gargling wail that made my hair stand on end. It thrashed wildly, flailing limbs pounding the ground. I fired again and again, each shot lighting the yard in brief flashes. The creature convulsed, letting out a choked howl. I could see dark fluid spraying from wounds blackish green, sizzling where it landed on the grass. The stench was unbearable, like acid and decay. My stomach churned, yet, even injured, it lurched forward, half crawling, half pulling itself toward the house. Panic seized me. I kept firing until the rifle clicked, empty. I hadn't counted my shots in the chaos. I fumbled for more ammo, but my hands were shaking so violently I dropped the cartridges. A heavy impact shook the wall. The front of the farmhouse groaned. I heard wood splinter. The creature was slamming itself against the house. I grabbed the bullets from the floor, reloaded with trembling fingers, and fired through the wall, hoping to scare it off. A piercing shriek answered, and the thrashing grew more frantic. For a moment I feared it would break through the boards entirely. Then slowly the thumping subsided. I dared to peer out the window again. The creature dragged itself away, leaving a wide smear of black fluid on the ground. Its body heaved, raspy gurgles echoing in the night. It crawled back toward the well, pausing every few feet as if on the brink of collapse. Without thinking, I scrambled outside, ignoring the reek of gunpowder and rot. If it was retreating to the well, maybe I had a chance to finish it off. I approached cautiously, rifle raised, scanning for any sudden lunge. The creature was moving sluggishly, half dead by the looks of it. But the sheer size and monstrous shape kept my fear levels high. Just as I neared, it heaved itself over the rim of the well, disappearing into the darkness below with a wet splash. I cursed. I couldn't shoot it in the water. I'd be firing blind. I stood there panting as the stench assaulted me. The yard was smeared with slime and that foul fluid. The well's water churned and bubbled. Then came a final tortured groan from the depths and silence. It took nearly a week to arrange proper demolition of the well. I called in every favor I had, told enough lies about structural hazards, and eventually paid out of pocket for a local team to bring in heavy machinery. I didn't let them near the site alone, insisting on overseeing the operation. They thought I was eccentric, but as soon as we started, a few of them gagged at the foul stench rising from below. We pumped out as much water as we could. My stomach lurched as we uncovered lumps of rotting flesh, bones of livestock, and partially dissolved remains of who knew what else. No sign of the creature, though. Maybe it sank deeper into an underground chamber, or maybe it had truly died from its wounds. Regardless, we filled the well with rubble and concrete, then bulldozed the top layers, collapsing the old stone walls. Finally, we covered the mound with fresh soil. Throughout it all, I kept the rifle close, scanning for any movement in the brush. But nothing emerged. No slithering shape, no guttural growl. By the time the machinery rumbled away, the well was a buried ruin. I'm still on the farm, though I'm not sure for how long. Some nights I wake drenched in sweat, convinced I hear a wet scraping noise beneath the floorboards or out in the distance. Other times, the wind howls and I swear I catch a faint gurgling moan. I tell myself it's just my imagination. I've read enough horror to know that sometimes these things don't truly die. Sometimes they retreat, waiting for a chance to regrow, to spawn anew. Great Uncle Hollis's journal sits in a locked drawer. I glance at it occasionally, heart heavy with the knowledge that we shared the same nightmare. We both faced that thing, wounded it, tried to kill it. He thought he succeeded, yet decades later, it was still growing. I can only pray we succeeded this time. The fields have started to recover. Grass grows tall where the well once stood. The broken barn stands silent. Whenever a stranger asks me about the property, I keep my answers vague. I don't want to talk about the slime trails, the shrieks in the night, the blackish-green blood that hisses when it hits the ground. I don't want to remember how close I came to being dragged down into that watery pit, never to emerge. If there's any lesson in this, it's that some secrets are better left buried. My father chose silence, and maybe that was a mercy. But now I know the truth, and the knowledge haunts me. The next time I hear a faint slithering sound near the barn, or a low growl echoing from the distance, I'll wonder if the monstrous legacy of that well has truly ended, or if it's only sleeping, waiting for the right moment to crawl back into the world above. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that evil has a way of surviving, even in the places we think we've buried it, especially in those places. And the well, with all its dark water and hidden chambers, was the perfect cradle for something ancient, hungry, and almost impossible to kill, so I keep my rifle loaded. I avoid walking too close to that patch of fresh soil, and at night I can't help but listen for any sign of movement in the earth. If I hear it again, if the ground starts to shift and crack, or the wind carries that same rancid stench, I'll be ready, or so I hope. But a voice in the back of my mind reminds me that no one, not even my great uncle with his guns and desperation, ever truly escaped it. We just forced it to hide a little deeper. Time will tell if it's gone for good. For now, all I can do is wait, watch, and pray. Because sometimes what we bury doesn't stay buried, and if the nightmare returns, God help anyone still living on this land when it crawls out of the earth.